Okay. So if you wish to speak, I'm going to ask you to raise your hand using the raise hand function and ask your question. And I would also ask that everybody who speaks identify themselves by name. You know, we are neighbors, we work with each other, we're people who we see in the grocery store and on the town common and out on walks. So I hope that we can all engage in that spirit, and I thank you all for doing that. Um, I received several questions from people, but I'm going to sort of start with just some basics that are questions that we get asked all the time, and then I'll open it up to some of the more specific questions that I've heard. All right, the first one is, what are we actually voting on January 14th? Okay, I think that's a good place to start. So you have two options on January 14th, yes and no. All right, a yes vote is a vote that affirms the action taken by town meeting to pass and for the town to adopt as zoning, the zoning that is encompassing of the housing plan. It would have been called the neighborhood housing plan at the time of town meeting. It's now the only housing plan that's in front of you. So we keep calling it the housing plan. If you vote no, then there is no zoning that's MBTA compliant that's in place. The town has nothing on the books at that point. So no completely rolls back any action taken by town meeting on this zoning. And the town will need to take further steps to become compliant with MBTA communities. The next question that I get asked often is, are we in compliance now with MBTA communities? The town has had a phone conversation with an organization called EOHLC, which is the Executive Office of Housing and Living Communities. I think if I got the acronym right, but they are the executive function that is responsible for enforcement of the MBTA Communities Act or for the funds that are related to that. They have told us that because of the zoning referendum, we are currently considered out of compliance. All right, that's because we now are suspended and we are waiting to see the outcome of the vote on January 14th. Now, as long as there's no funding decisions that are made between now and then, we're in good shape. We are not expecting that there will be funding decisions related to town funds that are governed by or are part of this MBTA community's requirement until sometime in February. There's a couple of actions that the town is involved in, but if we're compliant by January 14th, hopefully everything will be fine. So that's something to consider there. What's the next question that I get asked all the time? The schools, all right, we do have some other folks from schools and we'll come back to that. There were some new school numbers from the demographer that came out last week. They would suggest that Needham at this point is seeing happen what has happened in much of the rest of the state and in fact the rest of the country, which is that there is certainly a slowing in the number of houses that have turned over in our community. There is a declining birth rate that's going on. All of those demographics start to catch up a little bit at some point. But we are seeing with fewer houses having sold in the past year, we have fewer 0 to 4 age children who are moving into town. That entire picture means that when you look at school enrollment going out over the next 15 years, that we would anticipate that the schools and the school master plan will be able to fit any potential enrollment that could be anticipated from the project or from zoning and the zoning build out now. Okay, we'll come back and talk about that one, I'm sure, a little bit more. One of the other questions that we get asked frequently, actually, you know what? Why don't I just go ahead and open it up for people? I do want to say one other thing. Why did the town do this zoning? It's probably important to go back to that. The town's actually been working on a housing plan and toward this particular zoning over the last 3 years. So this isn't something that really came out of nowhere. I understand that for many people, they're only starting to become aware of this work, but it is work that's been going on for quite a long time. The town, first of all, spent a couple of years working on a housing plan. Then you had the Housing Needham Committee worked to develop a program for that would be compliant with MBTA communities. All right. And then the last piece that happened was that the planning board took it and did some further refinements on the recommendations from Hone and brought that to town meeting. Town meeting passed something in 2 stages, and so we do get asked about that. They passed something called the base plan. All right. The base plan is a plan that is compliant with MBTA communities. It exists in largely the same area of the housing plan that we're talking about now. It's our industrial and commercial corridor that runs along the spine of town. Okay. But it is a plan that really just looked at our current zoning that we had in place. And instead of making that zoning by special permit, it made it by right. We don't anticipate that that's enough to truly make any difference in people really being willing to invest in these particular areas. And we do believe that if people were to invest, that the increased density that is part of the second plan that town meeting passed, that's the one that you're being asked to vote on, okay, will in fact be necessary for developers to be willing to take the risk to make the investment. All right. I'm conscious of the fact that many people talk about this as a developer giveaway. And I want to be very careful and say that developers are not getting gifts. They are making a strategic decision that comes with risk to invest and build housing in the town. This housing is housing that we would expect to be good housing for people such as seniors who are already in town, for people who are younger who might wish to return to town, and for workers who we have in town who often drive, 40 minutes, an hour and a half to get to their job in Needham and back home, which is a significant part of your day. So if you can live and work in your community, which is how it was here for many, many years, people would like to be able to do that. I shouldn't take for granted that people understand what is going on with affordable housing. That's another question we get, right? Most of the housing that could be created under zoning, right? Zoning doesn't mean things get built. It just creates a framework for how things could be built. Okay, but most of the housing would be expected to be at a market rate. Okay, 12.5% of any units 6 or greater that get built will be built as affordable units for 80% of the area mean income. I don't have that exact number, but I think the 80% number, the last time that I had checked, was around $80,000. So if somebody was making $80,000 or less, then you would be eligible to be in one of these affordable units to pay the lower rental rate, for example, in an apartment, or a lesser rate if you were buying into a condo. We probably expect that any of this housing is largely apartments, but it could be condominiums. Condominiums, that is up to a developer. What else? We get asked all the time, why do you think that not all of this will be developed? Good question. The first thing that we would say was that the town rezoned Chestnut Street, for example, in 2009. So the zoning that I talk about as being really similar to this zoning that's in this housing plan was put in place by the town in 2009 and required a special permit to do this kind of project. Nobody's been taking us up on that offer, all right? Hasn't happened in 15 years. And part of why it hasn't happened on Chestnut Street is an interesting street. It is a number of relatively small plots that have existing people on them. And they would need to be combined to be a bigger plot, to be a 10,000 square foot lot. and participate in this. So it will take some cooperation between neighbors deciding that they are at the point where they have tenants who are not going to be there for a longer term or where they would wish to make different investment decisions on that street. That's usually a slow process to do that. The one place in this zoning that the town does expect to see developed, we would hope, is 100 West Street. There's been a lot of discussion about 100 West Street in town. There was tremendous hope a few years ago at this point that it would be senior apartments. Then that went away. Then there was a proposal for senior assisted living. That went away. And now the proposal, hopefully would come back under this MBTA communities as apartments in Needham Heights, directly next to a train station, next to our senior center, across the street from Trader Joe's and a CVS and a Starbucks and a bagel store. So it would be a tremendous place to bring back to life. And the town would hope that that's true. You may recall that when the zoning was referred out of the Housing Needham Committee, 100 West was actually listed at that point in the process with a zero propensity to change. So there were some further changes made between Hone and the final zoning. And it is anticipated that there could be a project there now that would be economically viable that would occur. And I think that the town would like to see that happen. People have said they'd like to see that building stop being an eyesore and feeling neglected and be brought back to life. Other than 100 West, we'll see what happens. It will take a while. I know that I've seen pictures, I'm sure you have too, of the section of road on Highland Avenue at Bertucci's. So I want to talk about that for a second. It's a picture that shows 4-story buildings on both sides of the road. Let's consider that. The zoning for the business district, which is the Bertucci's lot, that section of town that runs from Eaton's Funeral Home down to Sudbury Farms, okay? That does permit up to 4 stories over 50% of the lot. Okay, the remaining 50% of the lot would not be built on, covered with a building. So it's a possibility that you could have 4 stories along the street. It means that there'd have to be a little bit less than that. So you have a driveway that can get to the back and could put parking, for example, at the back and open space. It would make sense for parking to be along the tracks, frankly, there. So could that happen there? There are some places there that have a higher propensity for getting some building on them or not. Okay. Across the street from there is very interesting. It's the condominiums. I think they're called Highland Terrace. Okay. They've been there a long time. People love those condominiums. All right. Those are a low propensity to change. If somebody were to try to develop something there, they would need to buy out all the owners. I'm presuming the people who own those condos are not going to sell to somebody unless they have a good place to go that they're happy to go. And right now, they're in a place, again, where they walk to the center of town, they walk to the grocery store, they've got a town common, they've got Greens Field, they've got Memorial Park. You've got lots of options for things that you can do from those. No one expects those condos to change, so I would not expect to see that there. Okay, so those are the things that people think about when they're thinking about what's the propensity to change and the likelihood that something would change. Okay, I'm going to stop talking. I'm going to open a question. If people would like to raise hands, I will call in the order that I see them pop up. Uh, so I can see Suzanne Heffernan has her physical hand raised. I can't see everybody's physical hand. If you could find your hand at the bottom, I'm gonna go to Suzanne for right now. But at the bottom, if you would find on reaction, click on reaction, it has a little heart, and then you'll see something that says raise hand. Okay, that will help me see you in order. And I don't have everybody on a screen because there's more people here than are on one screen for me. Zach, can you find that? I saw you working to raise a hand. But Suzanne, why don't you ask your question?
All right. So hi everybody. I'm Suzanne Heffernan. Thank you, Marianne, and Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah, and everything else, Kwanzaa to everybody. So my question is this only, I just rewatched all of the October town meeting. Is there any mixed use in this plan, meaning retail down below and apartments upstairs, or is it strictly residential only? Like you would displace everybody, all those businesses, including down across the street from Costa's Pizza, that kind of thing.
So, this particular zoning, so let's remember the state's goal, right, was to create opportunities for housing,
Exactly.
right? And the town of Needham did that without changing any single family zoning, all right, which we thought was important given the feedback we had from people. There is a provision on Chestnut Street and in the business district, which is that block again from Eaton's to Sudbury, all
Yep.
right, where people can have a taller building by including, okay, commercial on the first floor.
Okay.
So that is the provision that's been built into this. So it has an
Perfect.
option where people can do it. And in fact, I've talked to the folks up in Lexington. That is part of what they're seeing is that existing businesses on a street are keeping the first floor for themselves and putting apartments up above. So towns are seeing that kind of activity.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Ken.
Hello, Marianne. I didn't want to jump in front of Zach, who put his hand up ahead of me, but nice
Where
to
did
see
Zach
it.
go? Okay. All right, I'll go to you next, Zach. I know you're doing the physical hand. Okay.
Find the button, sorry.
All
Um,
right.
I'll ask one and may come back later on another one or two. As I've kind of watched and read this, I've understood the people who are opposed to this talk about the total amount that can be billed and what would happen there. The people who seem to be proponents of it suggest that's never going to happen, and we're looking at and projecting much lower numbers. What's built in if those assumptions are wrong, or if not built in, what's the process to change course if we got our estimates wrong as to how much people would build and develop and what would be involved in doing that?
So I don't think we're wrong about overall numbers of units, right? The question is, what's the pace?
Yep.
And if it ever completely happens, right? I can tell you that historically, when you make zoning changes, nobody ever sees it fully happen. But if it were to happen at a pace that is faster than the town is comfortable with, my assumption is that town meeting, in that case, would make some decisions about a particular area that was developing faster or some particular something that was occurring in what was coming forward. And they would go back to town meeting, or the planning board would essentially take a proposal back to town meeting that would change some parameters. And the answer is we have some room to change some parameters, okay, because our goal was actually to create some real housing, to offer more opportunities for different types of housing for people in town. So just as for example, what might that look like? It could mean that somebody could make a decision to go back and under certain parameters, make it a special permit again, right? We know that that slows down the decision-making process, even though under the zoning that we have site plan review, which lets us touch a lot of the same parameters that a special permit does. It just means that it needs to happen within a 6-month period. You can't drag it out for 3 years or longer. Okay? So that's the kind of thing that I would expect to see happen if somebody decided that the pace was not what was expected. We do have tools.
And do you think, given the general tenor of town meeting on adding housing, ratcheting back is something that is politically palatable?
again, I think it's gonna depend on what the conditions are at the time, right? What is it that's happening? And is it something, we have continued to push, for example, Suzanne asked the question about the commercial activity, right? Needham was one of the communities that pushed very hard for a provision that would permit commercial on the first floor. Initially, there was no such provision in MBTA communities, but we got a change. I am presuming that as communities go into that, we will continue to talk to the state about what we see happening. And there may be other changes as we all learn.
Thank you.
Okay. Right
I'll
now,
look
we
back in
know we're
line for
just
that.
way under in terms of housing supply. Zach, let me turn to you.
Thank you, Marianne, and thank you for hosting this and opening it up to everyone to ask some questions. I have two questions. One is very brief, and the other is more maybe more involved. The first one is I'm just curious, and you have a couple of different positions in town select board, and I know you're on the Yes for Needham committee. In what capacity are you speaking and answering questions tonight? Is my first question, and then my second question is more specific about the neighborhood plan versus the base plan. And I just want to understand if folks that are on the yes side of things have spoken to the business owners of the businesses that are in the likely to develop zone, and to get their thoughts and understand their concerns, because they do have concerns. And I do know that there's, the Chamber of Commerce has posted a list of businesses that support the neighborhood plan, which is great, but and I could correct, but in my review of those businesses, it does not look like any, perhaps one of them, are in the likely to develop zone. So I'm just curious what the Yes for Needham proponents, if that's what if that's the capacity that you're here tonight, what they have done to reach out to those businesses to hear them out as to their concerns in terms of potentially losing their business as a result of this development. And thank you again for hosting this.
So I am speaking as a Yes for Needham proponent. All right. And the goal of Yes for Needham is to have factual information. So that is why I'm speaking here tonight. You're right that a number of business owners have been spoken to, both in and out of the district. All right. The housing development is responsive to many of the folks who have signed on with the chamber previously, who are really interested and hoping that there will be some housing available for employees ultimately here through the affordable component. I'm thinking about who's on that street, and I'm not looking at the list. The one that is obvious on the street is the hospital, who is strongly in favor of this, and has many properties on Chestnut Street. I would hope that the folks who own the land, right, on those properties, that they are thinking about the businesses who are there. That's what we would all hope. And as I mentioned, in Lexington, that actually matches what they have seen occur so far in a couple of the developments that have happened. And we will have to see what happens going forward. But the person who owns the property, I do expect at some point we'll make a decision about their property, as each of us make decisions about our homes.
Right, the owners will make the decisions, I guess, and maybe I didn't ask an artful question, but I'm less concerned with the owners of the property than the business owners that are leasing space from those properties, that have small businesses, dance studios, dry cleaners, things of that nature. Those are the folks that I would be more interested in speaking to, and knowing if they're aware that they might lose their business if their owner of the property wants to sell. So I think that that's something that folks should consider. So thank you.
So one of the things that we find, that I'll just mention, that I'm going to move on to the next person, is many of these people have long-term leases. All right. And what we've already found in talking to some of the landowners is they're actually not interested in making a change because they do have tenants with long-term leases. So everybody's situation is different, and I'm sure that people are thinking about that. And we certainly hope that the business that people know and love in Needham will still be available someplace here in Needham. Aaron Hollander, I see you up next.
Yes,
And
thank,
then I'm seeing Victoria and Peter. Those are the three hands I see up right now.
thank you, and happy holidays. I actually want to piggyback off of Ken's question. Um, if I think I share the same worry. If I understand that not every zone can be built or will be interesting for a developer, but there is a fear that, forget the pace, but that more than what. Okay, here's my question. What is the estimate that you think will be built instead of the 3,300? Because on Facebook you can see everything from 1,000 to no more than 2,000. You can find. So what is your estimate? And then why didn't we approve, I would say, the 1,700 based on where you think they would be built, or at least once we get to 1,700, we're cutting it off. So we're approving 1,700, and there are different areas where we can build. Developers will tell us what they want, and when we reach 1,700, we stop.
So, interesting question. I can't tell you what my estimate is.
That's a
I'm
good
not
question.
somebody who does build out estimates, right? And the other thing I would say is whether you're talking 1,700 or 3,100 or 3,200 or whatever the number is, you should understand that was a number that was really over a 30-year period, right? So it's a long-term build out. None of this happens overnight. You know, we are a town, I sit here, I'm in a new house, but my house was new in 1994, right? Things happen over long periods of time. So I'm sorry, and I'm sitting here blanking right now. The rest of your question was?
I know, I'm sorry, I was mumbling there. My question is, why didn't we approve the base plan number of
Okay, got
in
it.
more potential areas, but once we reach that number, we stop?
All right. So this has to do with the structure of MBTA communities, right? You had to have a certain amount of land. It had to be at least 50 acres. There had to be portions of it that were contiguous. So it went across multiple areas. Some of them, as we've said, are more likely to be developed or not likely to be developed. But it's that nature of having to be contiguous, right? And how we structured things that led to that structure. Why didn't we just do the base plan? The planning board brought two plans to town meeting. Town meeting approved both of them. That was what happened. Okay, so, and part of the reason for bringing two plans was we brought a plan that was compliant. We said we don't think this will do much, but this is an option. And then the planning board brought a second option that said this is more. We think this is actually more in keeping with the discussion that has been had in town over the last few years about making some housing real in town, making some options for housing real. And town meeting passed both. So it was really, both of those were put on the table. They were both passed. And, you know, I got to say, I'm going to say as a select board member, we don't always love the decisions in town meeting, but we do live with those decisions. So you take it to town meeting has a wisdom, it goes up or down. This is what happened. And now at this point, it's going to the voters.
Why
Okay?
did it happen though?
So
I guess
thank
we're
you. Wait, Bill, I didn't call on you. Let me go to Victoria. Thank you. Can you,
Oh,
there you go.
can you hear me now?
Yes, I can.
Okay. Thank you, Marianne, for organizing this meeting. It's really helpful. And I have probably a few questions, if I may, but I would ask them separately so it would be easier probably for you to answer them. So the first one, maybe it's more rhetorical. So there are about 180 towns as I understand, that are on MBTA line that have to comply with the state requirement. And majority of them, as I understand, go with what we call here base plan. So with 180 communities building by what is required, why do we think that we need additional inventory? Why do you think we need to over comply if by the time we have all towns have base plan fulfilled, it will be enough or maybe even more than enough inventory in Massachusetts for everyone? That's question number one.
So you know what? We made a different decision, and I don't know whether it's most or what it is, because frankly, I haven't been following other towns. What we've been trying to do was make a plan that worked for Needham. All right, so this plan is a plan that really was developed by Needham with lots of participation. I've never seen so many citizens actually come out at meeting after meeting after meeting for this, talking about what they wanted to make happen for housing, what it might look like, what the possibilities could be, who they wanted to have room for in the community and make room for with new options for housing. So the reason why we have the plan we have is this is what people in Needham said they wanted for Needham. And that's what we're focused on. Okay?
Okay,
I'm going to
thank you.
give you one other question, then I'm going to move on because we do have a bunch of hands up now.
Okay, I'll try to merge them together. So talking about affordability, and affordability is really important for me. I am immigrant myself. Today is exactly 33 years since I landed here in United States and in Massachusetts. So I understand we landed here with $200, three members family. So I know what affordability means and what it means to not be able to get to the place I want. Anyway, so across a lot of documentations, videos, everything I watched to educate myself, I see a lot of conversations about affordability. And in my experience, what we're gonna build in Needham other than 12%, it's not affordable. So when we say people like me, and I'm about retirement age, can retire here or move to a smaller place to downsize, no, it's cheaper to live in my house. For kids like my daughter, who is 26 years old and 2 years out of graduate school, she won't move to Needham. She'll live somewhere because it's very expensive to live in Needham. So I am trying to understand why are we including this affordability word when it's misleading. Other than 12%, it's not affordable.
So Victoria, you are correct that not all of this is affordable housing, all right? Only some of it is. The state didn't actually have any provision for affordable housing in it.
Right.
The affordable housing provision is one that Needham put in, that we were permitted to put in. So we put it in at the maximum that we are able to do so. That's 12.5%. What will happen eventually, right, is as a state, as an area in the Metro West, there is not enough housing. All right. And Needham has been working at this for a while. We have built housing through the 40B system. I can tell you that all those apartments, even though many of us sit here and say, wow, that's a lot of money per month, they're full. Okay. And I certainly anticipate that if more housing is built, it's going to be full, right? Developers are not looking to build housing to not have it fill up with people. There is demand for it. So I hear your frustration. What I believe is that there is economically supply and demand, all right? And we need some more supply if we are going to hope for prices to moderate. Okay, thank you.
And I agree, but it's not for our retirees. those apartments are not for our retirees or our graduates. Yes, it's for people who can afford it. That's all I wanted to say.
And we actually do have a number of people in town who will be able to afford it. But yes, I do hear you. Peter, you are the next person whose hand I see.
Hi,
And I'm
Marianne.
letting people go along here. Yes.
Thank you again for doing this. I'll echo that sentiment. I think my question is more, you mentioned earlier that the town meeting could always stop a development in process if they wanted to, and it was beyond the scope of what we imagined happening, whether it's pace or size or scale, whatever that ends up being. That's hard for me to imagine that would actually happen, that we would be able to mobilize that quickly, but let's assume that that's possible. I think where I struggle is, why not start with the base plan and we can always expand from there, test, iterate, prove that it's working as we expect it. And I think what your hypothesis is that there's certain developers that wouldn't be interested based on the base plan. And so I'm curious, have there been conversations with specific developers that have given us confidence in that hypothesis? Or is it just a belief?
So first of all, I'm going to say town meeting had the opportunity to do that and they chose a different path, right? And that is the path that we have in front of us today. Okay, for everybody to vote yes or no on. And my opinion is I hope you will vote yes. We talk to, or the town talks to developers regularly. And I would just come back to the observation that I made earlier, that if we look at what's happened since 2009 on Chestnut Street, and there's been a lot of discussion with people who are landowners on Chestnut Street and with developers about Chestnut Street, we've not seen any development happen there. So my view would be it's going to take more than what we have in place to encourage some change there. And we would actually like to see some changes possibly on Chestnut Street to renovate it somewhat and to also get it to be a little bit more lively as we look at extending town center there and creating something that's more walkable. So, Bill Bagshaw, I see
Hi.
your hand up
Oh.
next.
Oh, sure. Thank you. Thank you for hosting this. I'll make a sort of a statement, a little bit of a provocative statement, and then I'll ask a question if that's okay, Marianne. I'm struggling with the reasoning that I've heard from the yes supporters, including you tonight. The argument that, hey, don't worry, it's going to take a long time, it'll never happen. But yet you're asking for us to approve it in writing. To me, that's I don't know, sort of a hypocritical approach. I wonder. So that's my statement, right? I struggle with that, and I think a lot of voters struggle with that notion that you're saying, "Don't worry about it; it's going to take a long time, or maybe it'll never happen." Well, now wait a minute, but it could happen. And earlier in the call tonight, you actually affirmed that those drawings that we've seen that got such a reaction this week, yeah, that could happen. So, me personally,
Bill, can I just stop you right there for a second?
please, yeah,
It
please.
could happen. How likely do you think that is to happen, that
Well,
Highland
then why are you
Terrace will
asking
be
for it?
rebuilt?
But thank you for that question, because I'm confused. So you're saying, how likely is it? Not likely, but why are you asking for it? It's causing all this consternation. Why not? And this gets to my question. Why not have a plan B, a middle ground? Why not just start with 100 West Street? Let's see how it goes.
Okay, so that's a great question. We can't just start at 100 West Street because that does not meet MBTA community's requirements. And the town needs to be in compliance.
Why
with
not start with the
MBTA
base
community.
minimum to be compliant? We want to be compliant and then see how it goes. Yeah, I'm still not understanding why that's not the prudent first step. And what
Okay.
makes me uncomfortable is when I hear as the answer, "Oh, Bill, don't worry, it'll take forever, it won't happen." No, wait a minute. You're asking for us to approve this and put it in the law. It certainly could happen. So I'd suggest we put that argument aside and say, let's assume it does happen. Because that's what you're asking for. You're asking for that to be approved.
So,
Yeah, yes.
Bill, I'm going to move on after I answer this and move to Nancy. But if it does happen, all right, and if it is not what the town wants to have happen, I am certain that the town will make further recommendations that will change the direction of the stream going forward, because that is what the town does, all right? But I think you and I managed to agree that the odds of Highland Terrace changing are very low, because you would have to get all those homeowners in agreement. Thank you. Nancy. Oops, unmute. Can you unmute? Do you see it down at the
Yeah,
bottom?
there we go. Sorry
There we
about
go.
that.
Perfect. Hi,
First
Nancy.
of all, hi, thanks again for doing this. My question, it's kind of what a lot of these people are talking about, because I too am a little bit of why. I mean, there's a big spread between the basic plan and the plan that's being proposed. And, it's proposing practically double the number of people. And I do worry about the impact of that on, you've made a comment about the school. So maybe that's not going to be such an issue. And we've seen that in town before. We've seen declining rates in students. And then, of course, we saw that them climb again. Needham
We
is
work on that all the time, Nancy, right?
I know.
Manage it up and down, so.
Exactly. So, let's put that aside. But I do worry about the infrastructure of the town. Should this plan be super successful? And you have a lot of this development. And I too feel like that's a big step between the basic plan and what's been proposed. And the other thing about it that you have spoken to, but I wish I felt more convinced about this, because it seems to me that we talk about why this is one of the reasons this is important is we want people who work in the town to be able to afford to live in the town, whether they're hospital workers or vendors or whatever. We see that in other towns. We heard about that on Nantucket with the hospital, how it was a big issue there. But the problem is that Needham is only becoming more popular as a town to live in. And I personally don't trust the developers in this. I'm sorry to say it, but I don't. And I feel like they are going to, the owners are going to try to, if they sell property, they're going to try to sell it for as much as they can. And the developers are going to develop these for as much money and to get as much profit out of them as they can. And so I feel that the greatest beneficiaries of this are potentially going to be the developers and not the town. And so it's those two things that I worry about. Those are the two big issues for me. And I don't think I'm
gonna come
alone.
back to infrastructure. Okay, and I want to talk about the developer for a second, because let's imagine that the developer is successful, right? And so the landowner sold their land and they got what they wanted, which is what people selling their houses hope to do as well. And the developer then built it and everybody moved into the place, and so he was getting money out of it. Needham actually benefits from that as well. And this is part of why this plan has been one of the ones that was proposed for town meeting to consider. All right, and is now in front of you as the voters. We believe that we need a lot more people in our downtown if we want our downtown to be a vibrant place. And if we want merchants who have, in all those stores who have products that people in town wish to buy, they need some foot traffic. We're doing pretty well at night for the restaurants, but there are times during the day when we don't have people who are walking in and out of stores at the rate that some of our shopkeepers would like to have people walking in and out of stores. And we've lost business to other communities for that lack of foot traffic. So my view is, if the developer is successful, Needham's going to be successful. We're going to benefit from that as well. Okay, this is not just a win for developers. If they're successful, the town is also going to be successful. The other thing that I want to speak to is infrastructure. Nobody has any guarantees, but what I can say is the town has studied this right? So we have a series of plans that have been in place. And they went through department by department, considering what the impacts would be, looking at the places along the spine, understanding what we already had in our capital plan, all right, and looking at this to some great extent, actually having developers come in will help us to accomplish a part of that plan, because if they want to build in a particular area that needs some infrastructure done on their timeline, they will end up paying for that to be done. That does not become a responsibility of the town. We have a plan that says an order of operations for things that we are hoping to work on infrastructure. But this could actually help to facilitate some of that. So it's in my view, a win-win on that front. Okay. One of the other questions I get asked is about traffic frequently, and I just want to speak about that for a moment. I've been in various roles in town for a long time now. Those of you who know me know that, right? I sit here and I was thinking the other day at Future School Needs, it is my 21st year, I think, on the Future School Needs Committee. So I started that at the beginning of my school committee service. Traffic is very interesting. We do have a lot of traffic in Needham. The traffic that most of us hate is traffic that is running through town, coming from places like Medfield and Dover and driving out to 128 and then driving from 128 back through to get back out to Medfield and Dover. I think about developments that were done in town that people worried about. We could go back to 1979 when the citizens of Needham worried about North Hill, and they were worried that the North Hill traffic was just going to completely gum up Central Avenue. That didn't happen, and North Hill has expanded twice more, as I say, since then. And I still drive past North Hill at least twice a day. And I think I see about one car coming out of North Hill, every month and a half. So I think about Modera, another place I drive past with some regularity, that we were very worried. And I shared that concern at the time that Modera was going in. And I say at this point, I think I've seen 4 cars coming out of Madeira in the last 7 years. So I'm less worried about traffic, because what I see is that the traffic from us is relatively low. I know that our biggest impingement on traffic comes from other places. So I just offer that as food for thought for people.
All good observations. The one of the things that I was thinking more of, though, is fire, police. Are they going to be stretched?
Which one, Nancy?
The
Sorry.
fire department, police department. Those are the parts of the town's infrastructure that I worry about. Are they going to be stretched? And the only other thing, Marianne, and then I'll shut up. But I love the idea of having all sorts of wonderful shops in town. But my concern is, are people going to shops, and are they going to go to shops? If you think about how much you order, I hate Amazon, but boy, I order a lot from that. And I, will those towns be successful in the current in the climate that we have for shopping these days?
So I think those are all good questions. I think there are people who still do like to shop. We are still seeing that, certain shopping areas are doing very well. Legacy Place seems to be doing quite well. I personally have a rule where I try to shop local first before I buy from Amazon. I hope other people do that as well. If I can't get it locally, then I can give myself permission for ordering it there. So, but we do see foot traffic in other areas, and we would like to have more of it here. Donna.
Yeah, so you stole a little bit of my thunder, because I was going to talk about some of the things that you talked about, sort of the idea that these developments are going to create so much traffic, and it just doesn't happen. Modera was a perfect example where there was a whole lot of conversation about how it was going to destroy, Greendale Avenue. And you're right, you go there all the time, like one car pulls out, people just are not going in and out of these developments as much as they are. But really what I wanted to say is thank you to you, Marianne. And I know many of us on the call know you, but many don't. And that you have been, servicing, taking care of this town for, what was it, 21 years, you said?
Something like that,
When you
yeah.
first started on the school committee, and I have watched you, and we have not always agreed on everything, on decisions, but what I have is the utmost respect for your process. And you forgot you sat on a board with 4 other guys. Some of them are on this call. I've never seen anybody manage a meeting as well as you do. And you'd go at nothing, without a great deal of study. And I have a lot of respect for that, and a lot of respect for the people who have worked on this. And so I truly don't understand all the details of this, but I trust you guys because I know how diligent you are. You go at nothing willy-nilly. As a matter of fact, you are so, and sometimes been more cautious than I would wanted you to have been on certain issues. So I have the utmost respect and trust. And the other thing I wanted to say is I've heard people talk about this is going to change Needham. Well, I've been in my house for 40 years, and change has happened in Needham in the form of about a quarter of the town. I think my numbers are pretty close. 20 to 25% of the town's housing stock have been torn down, and they were 1,500 square foot homes, maybe some of them 1,200 square foot homes, maybe 2,000 square foot homes, but now they're 4, 5, 6, 7,000 square foot homes. And I'm not somebody that's a naysayer against large houses. I grew up in Newton, lots of big homes, but that's a change to Needham. At that time, when I moved here, we bought our house for like $160,000, and it's good size house. People could afford to live in Needham if they were a firefighter. Some of them did. Police officers and firefighters bought houses, lived in town. That is virtually impossible now. So I am a huge proponent of having this possible avail, and whether they're part of the 12.5% of affordable or not, to be able to rent a space here in Needham, possibly. So I want to
Great.
thank you for all that you have done for the town. And I think I hope that people can respect that process that you have gone through, and others, for the last 2.5 years, studying this so carefully to come up with this plan. And I was very proud of the town for coming together, with Hone and the planning board and the zoning board, the select board, and the school committee. So it's important. Thank you.
So thank you. I'm just going to acknowledge here before I go to Ken that I know many people are concerned about starter homes. All right. And starter homes are really not part of this except apartments can be starter homes too. Many of us started in apartments in our very first place. So they are a gateway to some new things. But I think this question of starter homes is one that we continue to pay attention to, and that I am hoping that the planning board will make some other changes that can help to encourage the preservation of the starter homes that we have left through some other changes. So at any rate, more to come on that. Ken, I'm hoping you've got a train question, but maybe it's something else. I know trains are one of the things on your list, and we haven't had that yet.
It was a train question together with a developer question. I think, one of the things I wonder about is the town retaining its leverage vis-a-vis other parties that we have to negotiate with. On one hand, developers. On the other hand, the state. I think we're terribly served by the MBTA in terms of the schedule that it makes available to particularly younger parents who commute in and out of Needham and need to get home in the evening. As it relates to that, what can we do about that? Obviously we're already making this decision. I've mused about whether this is something we could have taken an initial step and told the state we'd be willing to go to more if there was more assurances. And the second piece of the question, as it relates to what leverage we're giving up, you made a very interesting comment about what we're able to do here with developers versus what we do in a special permit context with developers, as it relates to parking, as it relates to affordable units, as it relates to open space. Can you address maybe the trains and address maybe what we're giving up in terms of being able to negotiate versus what we're retaining at a top level?
So let me hit your train question first. Okay, we did not do anything with MBTA at all at this point with respect to trains. All right, and the reason we haven't done that, I'll be candid, is we still have train horns blowing all the time in town. So frankly, until we get quiet zones in place, I'm not telling the MBTA to send more. I'm like thrilled that we've gotten to a regular kind of hourly situation, but I hear you completely thinking about, particularly at the rush hours, it would be very convenient to have some more trains. Just for people who are on this call, another one of my committees is in fact the Quiet Zone Committee. So if I take that hat for a moment, I'm going to provide information to you, which is that we are expecting that at the Springtown meeting, we're hoping to have the dollars that are going to be required to start constructing some of the quiet zones, and we'll be bringing that forward. It's really a priority, and we need to make that happen before we have more horns, because there are some people we are making completely crazy all the time on that. Okay. The second question, okay, I am way too tired. Ken, give me
Yeah,
two
so
sentences.
the second question was giving up the ability to negotiate over a special permit with developers
Yes.
where the town can extract concessions versus them having a broad swath where they can develop by right. How do you think about that? You've been in the midst of a series of those dialogues over the years, and that's something I worry about us giving up a little.
So this will be interesting, right? Because here's the thing about zoning. We have layers and layers and layers of zoning, right? And somebody's going to come into a particular parcel and they're going to tell the town what kind of zoning they want to do there. All right. For example, one that's easy to describe because people know where it is, 100 West Street, right? The Carter Building. All right. It has zoning still where it could be senior apartments. Nobody took that away. Somebody could come in and say, we're going to do senior apartments here. Or somebody could come in and say, I'm going to do MBTA communities type of development here, right? Or somebody could come in and say, I want to negotiate with you and I'm going to speak to the select board and do a local initiative project. And I have a completely different idea about how I want to approach it. And I want to negotiate everything, right? And then it goes through through the ZBA for all the hearings, right? So in any of these places, there are a variety of alternatives that somebody could choose for their zoning. And I presume that when they have a project, they're going to look and decide, is it MBTA communities? Is it underlying zoning? Is it a 40B project? How do they want to approach the town? And that will set the parameters of engagement. So they're all open. But if we think about it in MBTA communities, where there's a suggestion that the town has less control there than they do in a special permit, that is a true statement because the goal was to eliminate some of the barriers to building housing, because I'm not speaking for any of us, but I'm going to say generically, many of us have the ability to want housing until it's next to us. All right. It happens. Okay. And so the state was trying to eliminate some of those barriers. And one of the ways of eliminating it was saying you could not impose a special permit. And as I say, there is now this site plan review, but it has a limited period. It needs to happen within a 6-month period. Okay. And people need to go through all the process and public hearings within that period. So that's what we will have to do. We will need to learn to do it effectively. And I'm going to say that in what I have seen over my 15 years on the select board, or coming up on that, okay, that developers are not looking to do a bad job. They do not want to build an ugly product that nobody wants, right? We're talking about buildings that many of you have said are going to have some apartments that many of us consider expensive, right? Which means it better be attractive, right? It better have landscaping. It better have some green space, and they will need a place to park their car. All of those things will have to occur. All right. So, I do expect that although our leverage is different, it's not that we have none. Does that make sense?
Yeah, if I can ask one specific thing, can we raise generally the same objections just within 6 months that we can raise on a special permit, or is it a more curtailed list of things that the town can push on?
It's generally a very similar list.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
And,
thank,
and I am sure we will hear all the things and the developers will hear all the things.
yep. Thanks for taking my questions. Thank you again for doing this and working on this. Appreciate that.
You're welcome. Suzanne, I'm starting to see actually, Suzanne, let me go to Tony Chen, please, because he hasn't asked a question yet. Tony, why don't you pop up next?
Sure. Thank you, Marianne, for hosting this, and apologies for cutting in line, Suzanne. So super helpful. This is like all new to me. I'm like honestly like 50-50 because I definitely agree. Like when I walk down Chestnut Street during the daytime, it's pretty depressing, just to be completely honest. Um, and my question is more as in because Donna mentioned it because she grew up in Newton. So did I, and I've noticed especially Newtonville more recently. It's been developed like a lot. Like you have these kind of big buildings. It's definitely more vibrant. I would say the apartments don't look the best, but like it definitely looks more vibrant and it looks great. Have we like talked to folks from them, the town, or people if they think it's a success and kind of what the overall feedback now that it's like all that stuff's already in place today? I'd just be interested to like from other towns like how they've viewed after they fully developed all this stuff, if they see it as a positive or negative.
So here's great question. We're all new at this, right? So Newtonville, I think, has had sort of a little villagey component that they've been working on expanding for a while. But the MBTA communities is new for everybody. Really, the first towns had to be compliant a year ago. We're in sort of the second wave of towns with December 31st having been our date. So there's not a lot of experience that we can draw on. We're gonna have to see. All right, but I agree with you. I mean, the reason that this plan was developed and put forward to town meeting and now to the voters was because there was a general desire for more vibrancy and more foot traffic downtown. And so they really looked at how could they build in places that could help more people to be downtown and take advantage of the commuter rail there along the way. Okay,
Thank you.
Suzanne, and I'm gonna say if anybody else who hasn't asked a question would like to raise a hand, feel free.
All right, quick question. Well, quick statement, and thank you so much, Marianne. My legal husband, Mr. Litigator, said, man, she's running a great meeting. So thank you and kudos. It's more of an observation. I think people in Needham still don't understand the differential between meeting the base minimum and what area that constitutes, meaning half mile, 3/4 mile from the MBTA areas.
It's within a half a mile of the
Okay,
train, of the commuter rail
versus
station.
the neighborhood plan and what the neighborhood plan does different than that base compliance, which is now called the overall plan. And
So,
that's my comment.
I'm looking, hang on one second.
So in other words, and correct me if I'm wrong, so I'll lead you until you get your headspace, because God love you for doing
Well, I'm
this the
looking
week
for a
before
chart.
Christmas.
I'm looking for a chart, so.
All right, so neighborhood plan was a half a mile, excuse me, the base
So-
plan was a half a mile from any MBTA location, and it had to be all contiguous. And the neighborhood plan allowed the expansion to the point where developers could go into other areas. Am I incorrect? Other areas?
No, let me restart.
Okay.
The difference between what people talk about is the base plan and the neighborhood plan are small. All right, so really don't worry about that. It all runs along that spine, okay? And down to the industrial area, actually right on the highway though, but along that spine in town. The difference between the plan that would comply but really not be expected to generate much, right? And the plan that town meeting approved, okay, really is a function of a couple of things. It permits one additional floor in several areas. In Chestnut Street on the west side, on the train track side, in the business district was the block from Eaton's to Sudbury. and in apartment 1A, because there are some apartment buildings which could use that. But it changed some other parameters. So, for example, in the business district and in Chestnut Street, it increased the floor area ratio that could have been permitted there. So it let you build a product that was denser and a little bit taller. Okay, so different things like that happen from one plan to the other without really changing the geography. There's some subtle differences in geography, but there's not a tremendous number of differences from one to the other.
Why?
Why did we make that change from one to the other?
Is it to accommodate, hopefully accommodate employees who work in Needham, so that they could be here, and or young families who might have children to come back into town? Is that the rationale?
Well, so if the difference between the base plan and the neighborhood plan means that some buildings actually get built,
Mm-hmm.
okay, because they are more economically viable from a development perspective at the denser construction,
Mm-hmm.
then that is what will help us get the options for people who work in Needham, for young people coming back to Needham, and for our seniors to stay in Needham.
And that's all, that was my thing, because I think there's still confusion around that. And thank you for doing this.
Okay, thanks, Suzanne. All right, now I see that Jeremy has popped up with a hand and he has not had a question, so I'm going to move to Jeremy next, if that's okay. And then I see Zach up next after that.
Sure, thank you, and sorry, Zach, to butt in here, but it's actually good timing because I wanted to tack on to what just happened. I am a strong proponent of the neighborhood plan. I think we should go forward with it. My goal tonight is to try to better understand how we should be talking about it. I think that a lot of the things that we talk about are not great messaging, I gotta say. I think saying the differences are small, don't worry about it, is not a good sell to somebody who's on the fence. I think that makes people nervous. I think we heard that from some people earlier tonight. I think saying we need to zone for way more than we need, but don't worry, it won't all get built, is also, it's a hard message to sell. And I think what you just said about having this plan lets us, makes it more economically viable to do the things that we want, is a really important thing that we need to be saying more. So I don't really have a question. I've been waiting for how do we talk about this other than it's good for Needham, we studied it and it seems like the right direction. That particular piece of this plan is the one that will actually make things happen, makes it more viable, I think is a really important point. So good work overall, but I just wanted to chime in with that point. So thanks.
Okay, thank you.
Can I actually make a comment on
Zach.
what Jeremy's saying? Because it's exactly kind of what he is saying. As someone who's more 50-50, when you talk about how the community needs to be more vibrant, I completely agree. I walk down Chestnut Street, it's pretty much dead during daytime. I think when I hear that, teachers or firefighters can live in these buildings, it's harder for me to believe that because I looked at the Kendrick in Needham. Those are very expensive, and I don't think they can afford it. It's just more messaging. I'm leaning towards yes, but I do agree with Jeremy how things are stated and kind of how it resonates with people. It's probably a big thing. But again, you're doing a great job. Thank you very much. It's been super helpful. Just wanted to quickly chime in there.
Great. Zach?
Thanks, Marianne. Just wanted to chime in briefly and ask a question about the businesses in town and why you feel that the neighborhood plan will be such a boon to them. Like Don, I was born here in the late 80s, and I've seen the town change quite a bit over those almost 40 years. And I've also seen the population in town grow quite a bit over those 40 years. So I guess my question is along the lines of why is it that you believe, or what data have you seen that supports the conclusion that it's the population in town that is perhaps not making our downtown and our shops as strong as they might be? I mean, Wellesley doesn't seem to have the problem that we're having. So I'm curious as to why it is that you believe it's the population that's causing some of these issues. And then tacking on to that is, is there any data that you have seen and that you're relying on that shows that there will be an appreciable positive impact to businesses in town if we do the neighborhood plan versus the base plan? What is the actual appreciable positive impact supported by the data that the neighborhood plan will be more of a benefit to our businesses than the base plan? And again, yes, echoing what everybody said, thank you so much for your time.
So, you're right. The town of Needham has grown somewhat. When I think about this throughout most of the period that I've been involved in looking at population and thinking about school population, right? We tracked for a long time at a population that was 28, 29,000 people. And I think it had been there for a while. At the latest census in 2020, we're now up around 32,000, right? And I would think that some of our places like Charles River, the Kendrick, Madera, they've all contributed to that increase in population, frankly. It's come from things like the new apartments and condos that have been built in town that are places where housing is a little bit denser and more people move in. Okay, so that's true. But what we still see is today's society is an interesting thing. I suspect that Needham years ago was a place where everybody walked and kids were out on their bikes. Certainly my kids were out on their bikes years ago, but I think people today worry about that more, as they should, right? Cars are bigger, heavier, drivers are more distracted. We all think about that. All right, we're all very aware of the consequences of what can go wrong. And I think that contributes, in fact, to fewer people in some ways going downtown unless it's really a destination. So having the stores that can make it definitely attractive so that people think about it as a destination. I hope the town will continue to work to make the town more walkable and more accessible for other modes of transportation than cars. But there is parking for cars downtown. I hope we can make it safer for other routes to get there easily so that they could participate downtown. And I do think that having the foot traffic is important. Tina Burgos, who was a store owner in town at Covet and Lou, which is a really lovely shop that has some fun things in it, ended up closing her Needham store and moving to Newton Highlands, where she does have more foot traffic, and that, doubled her store's business within 6 months. So we were not able to generate that for her. And foot traffic would definitely help make that happen in this particular area. You mentioned Wellesley, and people who know me know that I work in Wellesley during the day. And in my day job, I actually work with the town government there as well. And they have come through some really difficult times in their downtown, but their downtown is looking much better now. It took a bunch of investment from some of their landlords, and they have turned over what was many, many empty storefronts, and they're starting to refill. Okay, and that's bringing back with products, that people are interested in being downtown to see. But that takes a commitment and getting people walking, and they are also putting in some changes that are more friendly for walkers downtown to keep that foot traffic there, and especially foot traffic that's coming to their restaurants that are open for lunch and open for dinner, so that they will take time between those to go visit. And I would hope that we will see more of that at some point in our town as well.
But in terms of the data, have you seen anything in terms of neighborhood versus base and what the differentiating impact on the businesses would be? And if not, that's
So
fine.
there
If
is
there is,
there
I
is
would
a
like to see it, that's all.
There is a fiscal impact statement that was done. It is available on the town website. So if you look up MBTA communities on the town website, it brings you to a page, and there is an entry for fiscal impact there. And that would be the best place if you want to dig into the data. Okay? Thank you. Aaron.
Yeah, I just so one of the things that I hear people are afraid of is losing the character of Needham. Like you just gave a an example of a store owner who had to close down and move to Newton, and she sees more traffic. But I think that people who live in Needham don't want to live in a city like Newton, right? On purpose, the character of Needham today is something we want to preserve as much as possible. So what would you answer that, like that and the 4-story, high buildings and so on? So what would you say to that fear?
So I think that people would like to have lively shops with good merchandise downtown. There's no doubt in my mind that Covet and Loop fit that category. All right. And so I would hope that we would have more of those. And we do have a number of storefronts that are empty, that I would love to see filled. And as you know, if you spend time downtown, there are particular blocks that you almost never see anybody walking on. I take that back. There are early release days. You will see a million kids heading for every pizza shop, and there's one on every block. So, but then definitely, so that kind of thing. But do I wish there were more? Yes. Therefore, I think the plan that is coming to voters to vote for is a plan that is a plan for Needham. It is one that will help us accomplish those goals and make for a better downtown, in my opinion. Thank you. Sergey?
Okay. I actually was going to ask a question, but now it's going to be a comment. I have to admit I'm quite skeptical about the extended plan for a long time. Since the first meeting I attended in town hall. But the main concern is that I'm coming from high-tech industry, and all our processes are developed through agile process, one small step at a time. Do one step, see what's happened. Do next step, see what's happened, and never do long-term planning. So you have like one general plan, but you don't try to plan every little step forward, create like outline and go. You do in small steps. So that was my pretty much main objection to jumping ahead of us and doing more than been asked to do. But now, finally, I've heard the main reason why we have to have this extended plan. And I don't understand why it was never been brought up. So everybody was talking about high school, getting overloaded, traffic and other things. But I think if I understand you correctly, is that you believe that if you have a base plan, this minimum plan, no developers would come and do anything, or very few. And so as a result, there will be no result. And so you throwing this extended plan as a carrot to developers to get them interested in actually doing something. Is it right? And if it's, from my point of view right now, this is like the main positive thing I ever heard about extended plan.
So you may or may not know that a developer sat on the Housing Needham Committee, that working group, all right, so that he could provide input. And what would he say? He would say that the plan that is in front of the voters now is a plan that is much more attractive so that developers can build an economically viable product. And the terms for construction have changed. When we think back to the last decade that had very, very low interest rates, right? Easy supply chains, we're in a different world today than we were then. So having the conditions to make it favorable for a developer to take the risk are more challenging. And they believe that what exists in the plan that's come forward will create a better economic opportunity for Needham.
So is it right that if we scale down plan but make it attractive, it will not satisfy requirements, right? So if you'll try to make it attractive, big buildings, but smaller area, boom, we're out of compliance. Is it right?
So you're correct that if we were to shrink the areas and not meet the contiguous, 50 acres of land and how that gets put together, then we would be out of compliance. So this is a plan that is both in compliance, is contiguous, and we believe it meets the goals of the town for creating some economically viable opportunities to create housing that will benefit Needham.
Understood. So,
Yep.
great.
Thank
Thank
you.
Hey, Marianne, can I get a clarification here? So,
You may.
so I think Sergey was asking, and I just want to confirm that if we did the base plan and not enough buildings would be built, then we'd be out of compliance, or the compliance is how many units you approve?
The base plan, all right, is in compliance. It just does not necessarily result in much housing, is the belief that we have. Okay, so you can be in compliance and it's interesting, Sergey talked about agile and doing small steps, right? To some extent, I would say the base plan, right, what we talked about before, is it has existed. It was a small step that was taken in 2009. We have a test period. I can tell you largely there were not even nibbles during that period. So there needs to be something different if we are to create economically viable opportunities for development of some of this housing. And that is the goal of the plan that's come forward to you now to vote on.
But from what I read on Facebook, at least, it was because it was not by right and it was in locations that were not attractive to the developers, right? I'm going back to my first question of why didn't we do the first 1,700 that will be built will stop, as I understand.
So Aaron, we are not permitted to zone for 1,700 units and then stop the zoning, right? Zoning creates certain conditions. To some extent, you will probably laugh, but I said to somebody early in this project, if I had my druthers, I would go searching for 3 large apartment building projects and I would have those 3 happen, right? And create 1,700 units that way. But that's not the option that we have in front of us. We have this other option that will be more organic because it will be, spread out over time and spread out over multiple properties that will need to be aggregated together over time so that these things could get created and come into being. All right, I am conscious that it is 9:27, so we've been at this for an hour and a half. That's a long time. I'm not sure if there are any more questions from somebody who hasn't asked a question. But I'm happy to just give it one more try. Otherwise, I would really like to say thank you to all of you for coming and really for sticking with it. I mean, I'm amazed at how many people are still here. I'm grateful. I hope if you have any more questions, you all have my email. Go ahead and email me. I am always happy to talk with people. So let me know and I will be willing to answer more questions. If you need a source for factual information, I encourage you to go to yesforneedham.com. The goal of that website is to provide facts. So that's available to you. And we had several people on this call, people from the school committee, people from the planning board. There were some people from the chamber here, but there are a lot of people who have spent a lot of time looking at this, considering the issues and trying to understand what are the best options for Needham. We think that what's before the voters is the best option for Needham. And so I hope that you'll vote yes or consider voting yes. Thank you. Wishing everybody a happy holiday and we'll see you in the new year and I'm happy to be your neighbor.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Marianne.
Thanks, Marianne.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Oh, Sarah.
Merry Christmas. All right, let's go. Well,